"Dad, you're an idiot." The words hit the living room like a hammer, echoing off the walls that had once held only laughter. The night outside was cold and still, a soft drizzle tapping the window pane. But inside, heat boiled through the air. Tyrone stood in front of his father, chest heaving, jaw tight, eyes sharp with the fire of arrogance. Malcolm didn't move. He sat on the old leather chair by the window, the same one he'd rested in for years after work. His grey beard hung long over his chest, silver glinting under the flickering lamp. His calloused hands rested on his cane, steady, unmoving, calm. "You hear me, old man?" Tyrone barked, pacing back and forth. "You're a fool. You don't understand how things work anymore. You sit there pretending to know better than me, acting like your wisdom matters in this world." He snorted, picking up his car keys and tossing them back on the table with a clang. "Newsflash, Dad, it doesn't." Malcolm's eyes rose slowly, steady and unshaken. "You've had too much to drink, Tyrone. Don't tell me what I've had." Tyrone snapped. His tone grew colder, crueler. "You don't own me. You don't control this house anymore. This," he slammed his palm against the wall, "is my home now, mine. You're just an old burden." Those last two words landed like stones. Malcolm's face didn't change. He simply inhaled, exhaled, and looked toward the family portrait on the far wall. Tyrone at 12 years old, smiling wide with braces, his hand proudly clutching his father's arm. A photo taken in better days. He rose slowly from his chair, the cane steadying his balance. The soft sound of its wooden tip against the floor echoed through the heavy silence. "Tyrone," he said softly, voice deep and even, "this house was built on more than your name. It was built on years of love, respect, and work. You may own the walls, but you've lost what made them a home." Tyrone scoffed. "Spare me your poetic speeches. You're not a saint, Dad. You're just an old man stuck in a past that doesn't matter anymore." He stepped closer, anger turning reckless. "You know what? I'm done listening. Get out, you hear me?" He pointed to the door, his hand shaking. "Out of my house." Malcolm's eyes flicked briefly to his son's hand, then back to his face. His gaze held no fear, no resistance, only quiet disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any shout could. "If that's what you want," he said simply. Tyrone's jaw tensed. "That's exactly what I want." Malcolm nodded once, as if he had already known this moment would come. He walked toward the hallway, every step deliberate, his long coat brushing against the floor. At the doorway he paused, looked back one final time and said, "Be careful what you call foolish, son. The world has a way of revealing who the real fool is." He opened the door and stepped into the night. The rain greeted him gently, dampening his shoulders as he descended the steps. His car was parked under the dim streetlight, glistening faintly under the drizzle. Tyrone slammed the door behind him. "Good riddance," he muttered. But for some reason, the moment the door closed, the air inside the house felt heavier. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was eerie, tense, almost waiting. Malcolm stood still for a moment on the driveway, breathing deeply, letting the night air cool his thoughts. The street was quiet, too quiet. He reached into his pocket, took out his old phone and scrolled to a single contact labeled M. Grant. He hesitated only a second, then pressed call. The voice on the other end answered almost immediately. "It's time," Malcolm said quietly. "Just as we planned. No further words, no explanation." He ended the call, tucked the phone away and looked back toward the glowing window of the house he had once built. Behind that light was his son, arrogant, lost, and soon to learn that every action has its reckoning. As he stood there, thunder rolled in the distance, faint but growing closer. The streetlight flickered once, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Malcolm's beard shimmered under the dim orange glow, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and resolve. He turned and began walking down the road, slow, steady, deliberate. His footsteps echoed against the puddles, each one carrying the weight of love betrayed, patience exhausted, and justice quietly set into motion. Inside, Tyrone sat on the couch, trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing, but his chest felt tight. His anger was cooling, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of guilt. He poured himself another drink, ignoring the faint sound of sirens far in the distance. As he looked toward the door where his father had stood moments ago, he saw something strange. 3 faint digits written in chalk, barely visible under the porch light. 817, he frowned. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. He rubbed at the numbers with his sleeve, but they wouldn't smudge. They seemed to shimmer faintly, almost glowing under the light rain. He shook his head, dismissing it as his father's senile nonsense, and went back inside. But those 3 numbers weren't nonsense. They were the beginning of a quiet storm, one that had already been set in motion. Malcolm's car disappeared down the empty street. Behind him, the thunder grew louder, the rain heavier. The old man didn't look back, and not once, because when a father like Malcolm Cole walks away in silence, he doesn't walk away defeated. He walks away prepared, and by the next morning his son's pride, his house, his comfort, his peace would come crashing down, just as Malcolm knew it would. The rain had stopped by dawn. The streets of Atlanta glistened under the pale orange light of sunrise, but inside Tyrone's modern glass-walled home, darkness still lingered. He woke to the dull ache of a hangover, the sour scent of spilled whiskey on the rug, and the faint memory of his father's face before he walked away. His phone buzzed weakly on the nightstand. 30 missed calls from an unknown number. He groaned, pressed his palm to his temple, and ignored it. Probably bill collectors, he muttered. He stumbled toward the bathroom, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water over his face. The man who stared back at him in the mirror looked hollow-eyed, older somehow, like the house had drained his spirit overnight. He stepped back into the hall, heading toward the kitchen. The morning was too quiet. Not a single sound of traffic outside. No hum from the refrigerator, no steady tick of the wall clock. Then he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The front door. The chalk numbers his father had written, 817, were gone. Completely vanished. Not washed away, not faint. Gone as though the rain had never touched that door at all. Tyrone rubbed his eyes and forced a nervous laugh. "Old man must have come back and cleaned it off," he whispered to himself, trying to convince the growing unease out of his chest. He grabbed his keys and phone and stepped outside. The world was eerily still. His car, a black 2022 Charger, was gone. He blinked. Looked again. The driveway was empty, tire marks fading into the wet street. What the... He fumbled for his phone and opened the tracking app. The signal blinked twice before flashing, "Vehicle reported seized." He froze. His phone buzzed again, another notification popping up. Bank account frozen. Tyrone's pulse spiked. He tapped open his banking app. Every balance, every account, every credit line, all locked. A cold line of text glowed on the screen. Pending investigation. What investigation? He shouted to no one. His voice echoed off the empty neighborhood, only to die in silence. He called the bank, automated message. He called again. Still nothing. Then he called his business partner, Marcus. After 2 rings, the call connected, but the voice on the other end wasn't Marcus's. "This is Agent Grant, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Who is this?" Tyrone froze. Tyrone Cole. Marcus is my partner. Why do you..." The line went dead. He lowered the phone slowly, his breath quickening. "What the hell is happening?" he whispered. Then his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. From Dad, just 3 words. "I warned you." Tyrone's body went cold. His hands trembled. He could feel the weight of those words pressing down on him, as if they carried something heavier than disappointment. Inevitability. He raced inside, pacing back and forth, his mind spinning. He's behind this. He must be. But how? He threw open the drawers in his father's old study, the room he had forbidden Malcolm from entering weeks ago. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. On the desk, an open folder lay half-hidden beneath a stack of papers. Tyrone pulled it free and froze. Inside were old documents, legal filings, bank transfers, names. One stood out, Malcolm Cole, board trustee, Cole Foundation. He felt a tremor in his chest. The Cole Foundation. His father's old non-profit, the one he thought had shut down years ago. But there it was, active, powerful, connected. He flipped the pages and found one dated just last week. Asset Reclamation Authorization. Signed, stamped and sealed, and below the signature in black ink the same 3 digits from the door, 817. He stumbled back, gripping the desk for balance. No, that can't be. But it was. Those numbers weren't random. They were a code, a legal key tied to his father's final action as trustee. That one call last night had activated everything. His father hadn't left in anger. He had left in power. By the time Tyrone stepped outside again, 2 black SUVs were turning onto his street. They stopped at the curb, engines purring softly. Two men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a woman holding a clipboard. "Mr. Tyrone Cole?" one asked. He swallowed hard. "Yeah?" "I'm Special Agent Grant. We need to speak with you regarding several fraudulent transfers linked to your company." "What?" "That's ridiculous, sir," the woman interrupted. "Your accounts and properties have been temporarily seized pending investigation. You'll need to come with us for questioning." Tyrone backed away, panic clawing at his throat. "This is a mistake. You can't do this." But the agents were calm. One stepped forward, extending his badge. "We can and we will. You can call your attorney when we get downtown." Tyrone's mind spun. He looked around desperately. The neighbors were watching now, curtains slightly parted. His face flushed with humiliation. He opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, one of the agents pointed toward the house. "Sir, your father's name is still listed as co-owner on this property. You'll need to vacate until the investigation concludes." The world tilted. "What did you say?" "Mr. Malcolm Cole is the legal co-owner. You were notified last year of the shared deed, were you not?" Tyrone's lips parted, but no words came. He remembered that letter, the one he'd tossed without reading, assuming it was another old family document. The agents didn't wait for his reply. "Pack what you need, Mr. Cole. You'll be leaving with us shortly." The neighbors had stepped outside now, murmuring. A child pointed. A camera phone glowed from a porch. Tyrone's hands trembled as he looked up at the house, realizing for the first time what he had truly lost. Inside, the walls felt different, emptier, colder. He walked slowly toward the door. And there, faintly visible under the light of dawn, the numbers 817 shimmered again on the wood, as if written in invisible ink, returning to life. He froze. The agents called out behind him, but he didn't move. The rain began again, soft, relentless. He whispered under his breath, "Dad, what did you do?" A single tear slid down his cheek as he stepped off the porch, flanked by the agents. Cameras clicked, neighbors whispered. His pride, his arrogance, his empire, all unraveling in silence. And somewhere across town, in a modest old apartment, Malcolm Cole stood by the window, phone in hand. He watched the same grey rain fall against the glass and whispered quietly, "Now he'll understand what foolishness truly costs." He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, steady as ever, his long grey beard resting against his chest, eyes filled not with vengeance but quiet justice. Because some lessons can't be taught with words, only with loss. The grey morning faded into an endless day of humiliation. Tyrone sat in the back of the black SUV, hands cuffed in front of him, the city passing by in silent judgment through tinted windows. His chest burned with anger, disbelief and fear all tangled into one. His mind kept replaying that moment, the numbers on the door glowing faintly under the light. The same numbers that had become his undoing. The car turned down Peachtree Avenue and pulled into a gated parking structure. Agents escorted him through a side entrance into the federal building. Inside, everything smelled like coffee and cold paper. The walls were pale, sterile, nothing like the warm home he had destroyed with his own arrogance. They sat him down in an empty room. Fluorescent light flickered overhead. A single file sat on the table. On its cover, his name, Tyrone Cole. After what felt like an hour, Agent Grant entered. Calm, professional. "Mr. Cole," he said, taking a seat. "You know why you're here." Tyrone scoffed, trying to sound confident, though his voice shook. "No, I don't. You're all making a mistake." "I've done nothing wrong." The agent flipped open the file. "You've been moving company funds through offshore accounts linked to fake charities. Those accounts were established under your name, but they're connected to your father's foundation." Tyrone blinked. "What foundation?" "The Cole Foundation," the agent said. "Your father's non-profit. It's still active. And according to these documents, it's legally designated as a beneficiary of every business tied to you." He felt the air leave his lungs. "That's impossible." Agent Grant slid a photo across the table, a legal form stamped and dated 3 years ago. At the bottom, 2 signatures, Malcolm Cole and Tyrone Cole. Tyrone leaned forward, squinting. He recognized his own signature. His hand trembled as he traced it with his eyes. "I don't even remember signing this." "You did," the agent replied. "Your father made sure of it. You signed over shared ownership during a refinancing process. Clever man. He protected his name and his assets, even from his own son. Tyrone's head dropped into his hands. His arrogance, his pride, his dismissal of every old man's warning, all of it crashed down in one suffocating wave. The door opened. Another agent stepped in and whispered something to Grant. He nodded, then turned back to Tyrone. "Your accounts have been cleared of all fraudulent activity. All funds have been returned to the rightful owner, your father's foundation." Tyrone's heart stopped. "He took everything?" Grant met his gaze. "No, Mr. Cole, he didn't take it. He reclaimed it. The law was already on his side. You just didn't know." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. By the time they released him, night had fallen. The air outside was cold, sharp. He stepped out of the building, his wrists sore from the cuffs, his mind blank. His phone was dead. His car was gone. He had nowhere to go. For the first time in years, Tyrone walked, just walked, down the dim streets, past the glowing diner signs and closed storefronts until his legs began to ache. He didn't notice how far he'd gone until he saw it, his father's old gate. The house he'd once called too small, too old, too plain. The home he'd mocked. The one that had built him before his pride tore it apart. He stood there under the streetlight, drenched in quiet guilt. He could see a flicker of light in the living room window, the faint glow of a lamp. His throat tightened. He reached for the gate, hesitated, then knocked once. The sound was weak, lost in the rain. He knocked again, harder. No answer. He waited. Rain slid down his face like sweat. He looked down at himself, his expensive clothes now soaked and dirty, his once proud posture bent under invisible weight. "Dad," he whispered. "Please." Still nothing. He sank to his knees on the wet ground, his fingers clutching the rusted metal bars of the gate. His voice broke. "I was wrong, okay? I was stupid. You were right. Please, just open the door." From the window a shadow moved, slow, deliberate. The curtain shifted. Inside, Malcolm stood in silence, watching. His long grey beard glistened faintly in the light, his eyes calm, unreadable. He didn't move toward the door, didn't speak. He simply watched. Outside, Tyrone pressed his forehead against the cold gate, tears mixing with rain. "I lost everything," he cried. "They took it all." "Dad, I need you." Malcolm closed his eyes for a long moment. The memories of his son's words echoed again. "You're an idiot." The sting was gone now, replaced by something quieter, understanding. He turned off the lamp and walked away from the window. Outside, Tyrone waited in silence, unaware that his father was there all along, watching, thinking, feeling the ache of a love too deep to be loud. Minutes passed, then hours. The rain grew stronger. Tyrone didn't leave. He stayed at the gate, shivering, his once arrogant voice now trembling with humility. He whispered one last time, his voice barely audible under the storm, "Please, help me, Dad." But the door didn't open, because some lessons aren't learned through comfort, only consequence. Inside, Malcolm sat in his chair, staring at the silent phone in his hand. The number he'd dialed the night before, his one secret number, still glowed faintly on the screen. It wasn't a call for revenge. It was protection, the final shield he'd built to ensure that when the storm came, justice would stand tall even if his voice did not. He leaned back, eyes heavy, and whispered to the quiet room. "I didn't want to hurt him, but I had to make him see." Outside, the storm began to ease. The night stretched long, and through that rain-soaked silence, a father's love and a son's regret finally met. Not in words, but in the sound of quiet tears against iron gates. The next morning came without light. The sky was grey and heavy, swollen with clouds that refused to move. Atlanta slept beneath a low hum of thunder, but outside the old brick house, Tyrone was already awake, and because he hadn't slept at all. He sat slumped by the gate, soaked through, eyes red and distant. His designer jacket clung to his skin like shame. The street was quiet except for the occasional car hissing through puddles, but even those sounds felt far away. He had tried calling, again and again. But the number he once used to reach his father now only echoed back with one cold message: "This number is no longer in service." He had lost his money, his house, his car, his reputation, and now, the last person who might have still cared enough to answer. His breath came out shaky. His hands trembled. Every prideful word he had ever thrown at his father replayed like a curse in his mind. "You're an idiot. You're useless. You don't understand." He pressed his palms against his face, trying to block the noise inside his head. When he finally lifted his eyes again, the front door creaked open, slowly, quietly. Malcolm stepped out. The old man wore a dark overcoat, his long grey beard damp from the mist. He didn't look surprised to see Tyrone there. He didn't even look angry. Just tired, the kind of tired that came from loving someone who had never learned how to love back. Tyrone scrambled to his feet, his voice breaking. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was drunk, I was stupid." Malcolm didn't speak. He simply stood on the porch, the rain dripping from the edge of his coat, his hands clasped in front of him. "Please," Tyrone begged. "They took everything. My accounts, my house, and even my car. I don't have anywhere else to go." Still silence. That silence crushed harder than any words could. Tyrone's voice cracked under it. "Say something, please." "Anything." Malcolm finally stepped forward, slowly descending the wooden steps of the porch. His eyes never left his son's face. When he reached the gate, he stopped just a few feet away, close enough for Tyrone to see the quiet pain behind those eyes. For a moment, it looked like he might unlock the gate. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke softly, almost like a whisper meant for both of them. "I told you once," he said. "Life teaches in ways words never can." Tyrone's chin quivered. "Dad, I get it now, I swear. I'll change." Malcolm shook his head gently. "You can't undo arrogance with apologies. You do it with humility, with patience, and with time." Tyrone pressed his hand to the gate, desperate. "Please, just let me in. I'll do anything. I'll make it right." Malcolm looked down at his son's trembling hand gripping the cold iron bars, the same hand that had once pointed toward him in anger, the same voice that had once shouted him out of his own home. "Do you remember what you called me?" Malcolm asked quietly. Tyrone nodded, tears running freely now. "I was angry. I didn't mean it, but you did," Malcolm said. His voice wasn't harsh. It was steady. "And anger doesn't plant words that weren't already inside you." Tyrone dropped his gaze, sobbing. "Please, Dad. I've got nothing." Malcolm studied him for a long time. His breath came slow, his eyes softened. "But the gate stayed closed. I gave you everything," he said at last. "Not just money or shelter. I gave you my patience, my trust, my name. You threw all of it away for pride. Now you know how pride tastes when it's cold." Tyrone's legs gave out beneath him. He sank back to the ground, pressing his forehead to the metal. His words came out in broken fragments. "I don't want money. I don't want the house. I just want you to forgive me." For the first time, something shifted in Malcolm's eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a flicker of sorrow. "I already forgave you," he said quietly. "Long before this." Tyrone looked up, confused. Malcolm's voice carried through the mist like a slow, steady river. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean I can let you back into a life you haven't learned to honor." The words landed heavy, not sharp, not cruel, but weighted with truth. Tyrone closed his eyes and wept silently. Malcolm turned back toward the house. His long grey beard brushed his collar as he looked up at the grey sky. "Come back when you've built something, not with your hands but with your heart." Tyrone looked up through tears. "What does that mean?" Malcolm didn't answer. He walked back toward the porch, his footsteps soft against the wet ground. Before going inside, he turned once more. "You always thought silence was weakness," he said. "Now you know it's strength." Then he closed the door. The sound of that door, that quiet, firm click, echoed louder than any slam. It was not rejection. It was truth. Tyrone sat there in the rain, unmoving. The street around him slowly came to life. Morning joggers, passing cars, the distant wail of a siren. But his world had narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat and the faint creak of the gate between him and the man who had once held it open. He didn't shout anymore. He didn't beg. He just sat there staring at the closed door, realizing that maybe this pain, this silence, was exactly the lesson he had needed all along. And inside the house, Malcolm sat by the window once again, watching. His eyes were tired but steady. He whispered to himself, "Now the real change begins." The rain slowed to a drizzle. The world was quiet again, and in that quiet, the distance between father and son became both a punishment and a promise. The rain had stopped by noon, but the street still glistened, a mirror of grey skies and regret. Tyrone sat on the curb, drenched, defeated and silent. His breath came out in shallow puffs, steam rising like ghosts of every mistake he had made. He didn't move for hours. He just kept staring at the closed gate. By evening, he finally rose to his feet. His limbs were heavy, his spirit heavier. He started walking, not knowing where to go. Every step echoed the same truth. He had built a palace of arrogance, and now he was walking through its ruins. He passed by familiar corners of Atlanta, the barber shop where he used to brag about his business deals, the diner where he'd once taken his father for breakfast, only to talk over him, never with him. Everywhere he looked, ghosts of his pride followed. When the streetlights flickered on, Tyrone stopped outside a payphone, the kind people barely used anymore. On the metal frame, scratched faintly, were 3 numbers etched in marker, 0731. He froze. His father's handwriting. Those were the numbers he'd seen his father write on the door the night he was kicked out. 3 secret numbers. Malcolm had said nothing about them, but had written them calmly, almost like a signature. Now they glowed back at him in the flickering light of the street lamp. Tyrone's heart pounded. His fingers trembled as he dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm older voice answered, "Atlanta Veterans Care Foundation. How can I help you?" Tyrone blinked, confused. I think I have the wrong number." Before he could hang up, the voice continued, "If you're calling on behalf of Mr. Malcolm Carter, we've been expecting you." He froze. "What did you just say?" "Mr. Carter called us a few weeks ago," the woman replied. "He said that when his son finally calls this number, we should tell him something." Tyrone's breath caught. His knees felt weak. "Tell me what?" The woman's tone softened. "That forgiveness isn't a place you're invited to. It's a road you walk." Silence. Then she continued, "Your father set up a trust here years ago for veterans' children who lost their way. He told us his son would come looking one day, not for money, but for meaning." Tyrone pressed the phone tighter to his ear, eyes flooding. He knew I'd mess up." "He knew you'd grow," she said gently. "And he wanted you to have a chance to rebuild. There's a small cabin registered under his name, about an hour north of the city. He asked us to tell you where it is when you were ready." Tyrone's throat tightened. "He planned this?" The woman paused, then said softly, "He called it his last lesson." Tyrone ended the call slowly, the words sinking deep into his chest. The cabin. The lesson. The silence. It all made sense now. His father hadn't been punishing him. He had been preparing him. He started walking again toward the bus station. Every raindrop on the pavement glistened like a breadcrumb on the road to redemption. The next day he arrived at the cabin. It stood quiet and lonely at the edge of the woods, a humble place built from weathered timber and time. Moss grew on the roof and the door creaked open with a sigh. Inside everything was simple. A wooden table. A single chair. And on that table, an envelope with his name written in the familiar, slow handwriting of his father. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter. "Son, when I wrote those numbers, I wasn't sending you to punishment. I was sending you toward understanding. You thought you owned the world, but you never owned yourself. This place, it's yours, not for comfort, but for rebuilding. I want you to stay here alone for as long as it takes. Learn to live without applause, without noise, without pride. Only then will you know who you truly are. I've left enough for you to eat and a journal to write in. The rest you'll earn. Don't call me. Don't visit me, not yet. When you've written your last page in that journal, come find me. Bring it with you, Dad." The paper trembled in his grip. His knees gave out, and he sat on the wooden floor, tears falling silently. For the first time in his life, he didn't fight the silence. He let it wash over him. That night he lit a fire. The cabin glowed with warmth. He opened the empty journal that lay beside the letter. On the first page he wrote slowly, "Day 1, I'm ready to learn what being a man really means." Outside, the woods whispered with wind. The fire cracked softly. And somewhere miles away, Malcolm sat by his window, gazing at the same grey sky, the faintest hint of a smile beneath his long grey beard. He whispered, "Now he's finally begun." The days passed slowly in the cabin, like pages turning in a forgotten book. The mornings came cold and still, the nights long and full of reflection. For the first few days, Tyrone felt trapped, not by the four wooden walls but by the silence that filled them. He had never known silence like this. No phone buzzing, no car engines, no television to drown out thought. Only the sounds of nature, the creak of trees in the wind, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of rain against the roof. At first, he hated it. He cursed it. He slammed his fists against the table when his thoughts grew too heavy. But the cabin didn't care. It just stood there, calm, patient, ancient, like it had seen 100 angry suns before him. On the 5th night, something changed. He found an old photograph tucked between the journal pages. It was him and his father, standing outside the same cabin years ago. He was maybe 8. His father's beard was already grey back then, his smile quiet but full of warmth. Tyrone remembered that day now, the smell of pine, the campfire crackling. His father teaching him how to fish. He had forgotten that memory. No, not forgotten, unburied it. Under pride, under resentment. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then he picked up the pen. Day 5, I remember the cabin now. I remember when I still respected him. Maybe I didn't deserve him then. Maybe I don't now. But I'll try. That was the first honest thing Tyrone had written in years. Weeks turned into months. The city lights that once defined him became a fading dream. His hands grew rough with work, chopping wood, fixing leaks, learning to cook from scratch. He began to understand his father's lessons, not through words but through effort. Each day he wrote in the journal, 1 page of reflection, confession, or gratitude. By the 2nd month, the bitterness in his words was gone. By the 3rd, there was humility. And by the 4th, there was something even stronger. Peace. The forest became his teacher. The quiet became his companion. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, he finally said it out loud. Dad, I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, carried away by the wind. He didn't expect a reply, but somehow the woods felt softer after that. Then came a letter. One morning, a black truck rumbled up the dirt road. A mailman stepped out, holding a single envelope. Tyrone hadn't received mail in months. The envelope was plain, no return address, no signature. Just his name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one handwritten line. If you've finished your journal, come home. His chest tightened. His hands trembled. The words looked like his father's handwriting, but the ink was fresh, the strokes slightly weaker, older. He packed the journal, locked the cabin, and took one long look at it before leaving. The forest had become a part of him, its silence now living in his breath. The bus ride back to the city was long. When he reached his old neighborhood, the memories rushed back, the arrogance, the shouting, the night he kicked his father out. He stood in front of the same gate where he had once thrown his pride like a weapon. Now he knocked, once, twice, no answer. He waited, heart pounding. Finally the door opened, and there stood Malcolm. His long grey beard framed a calm, knowing face. His eyes, deep and steady, studied his son without judgment. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was heavy, not cold but sacred. Then Tyrone fell to his knees. Dad, I'm sorry. Malcolm's eyes softened. He stepped forward slowly, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. I know, he said quietly. So you've learned. Tyrone pressed the journal into his father's hand. It's all in there. Every mistake, every thought, every apology. Malcolm opened the book briefly, scanning the first page, then the last. The corners of his eyes glistened. You did what I couldn't teach you with words, he murmured. You learned with time. Tyrone wiped his face. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Malcolm smiled faintly, his voice deep and calm. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, son. It's something you understand. They stood there, the evening light spilling across the porch, father and son side by side, two souls finally at peace. Malcolm motioned toward the house. Come in, dinner's ready. Tyrone hesitated. You cooked? I remembered your favorite, stew and cornbread, Malcolm said with a quiet chuckle. You used to hate the smell when you were a kid. Tyrone laughed through his tears. I still do. They sat together that night, eating in silence, the same silence that once separated them, now binding them together. As they ate, Tyrone noticed something on the wall, an old, faded frame. It was the same family photo he had once torn years ago, now carefully mended with tape. He stared at it, speechless. Malcolm followed his gaze. I never threw it away, he said softly. Broken things still have stories left to tell. Tyrone's throat tightened. I don't deserve you, Dad. Malcolm looked at him with gentle strength. Then become the kind of man who does. Outside, the night air carried the scent of rain and redemption. The world was quiet again, not empty but whole. Later that night, when Tyrone went to his old room, he found another letter on his pillow, one he hadn't seen before. Son, I didn't build this house to keep you in it. I built it so you'd have somewhere to return when the world broke you. I'm proud of you, not because you're perfect, but because you learned what matters. If I die tomorrow, don't cry for me. Live for me. Dad. Tyrone pressed the letter to his chest and whispered, I will. He turned off the lamp, lay down, and for the first time in years, slept in peace. The next morning, Malcolm stood outside, sipping coffee as the sunrise painted the sky gold. He watched his son through the window, asleep, peaceful, reborn. He smiled to himself and whispered, he finally came home. And the wind carried his words away into the bright, forgiving dawn.